welcome to this episode from Live Network, the publisher showcase that we do annually. Today I'm talking to Banshee, and we are specifically focusing on Mary Morrissy's new book, Penelope Unbound. So welcome Mary and welcome Eimear. Mary, I know you're going to start us off with an excerpt from the book, so maybe you can just give us some context about where it is coming from.
Sure, and thanks for having me, Dani. This book is a speculative historical novel about Nora Barnacle and James Joyce, but in fact it splits them up rather than leaving them together, and the moment of parting comes at a railway station in Trieste, and this extract is after James Joyce has left and Nora has been waiting for him, and she gets rescued by a Good Samaritan. So this is the moment of rescue. Signora, Signora, a voice calls, and she feels her face being tapped ever so politely. She opens her eyes and finds herself in a sweet-smelling cloud. She thinks of benediction and wonders if she's airborne or heaven-bound, but when she puts out her hand to steady herself, she finds cold tile and little pieces of grit on the palps of her fingers, and she realizes she's on the station floor, so not dead or ascended into heaven. The incense cloud clears, and she's looking up into the twin portholes of a man's nostrils, sitting in the tidy bed of a moustache. Her head is on something white, the snowy square of a handkerchief which is draped over this fellow's lap, and she's lying there practically on his crown jewels. Heavenly God, what has she done, or agreed to do? Oh my God, I am heartily sorry. She tries to raise herself up. Signora, the voice insists quietly. Calma, calma. The nostrils disappear, and she sees a pair of brown eyes peer at her from under a bowler hat. His right hand is supporting her neck like he's nursing a baby. His left is holding a cigarette that's burning low because he's too busy holding her head. When she puts a hand up to her head, she realizes her own hat is gone, and she looks to one side and sees it like an abandoned spinning top some way off, still rolling from side to side, taunting her. So she can't have been out that long. But does every blessed thing want to get away from her, even her ruddy hat? No gloves neither. Then it comes back to her that she'd recently come from the lave. But where's the valise? She tries to stir again. She's already lost one piece of luggage. Jim will kill her if two pieces are gone. Jim, it all comes rushing back. A new head appears, a halo of dry, brassy hair, the quivery double chin with little specks of white downy hair where she can see so close the lady has plucked or failed to. She's in some kind of uniform. The privy attendant, now she remembers, the one gathering in the sheaves in the lave. Behind her she sees the striped legs of the station master, another one. She can see the puckered hem of his serge coat, his bulging waistcoat. How odd everything looks from down here. He leans over now and takes off his peaked hat and hands it to the lave lady, and she begins to wave it back and forth over Nora, trying to create a breeze. Mr. Gentleman leans over her face and says, "Lei come si chiama?" The dirty article. Amo. Jim has told her is the verb to love. Amo, amas, amat. That's as far as he'd got. Or was that Latin? Sounded like the mass in confession, day in, day echo. Mr. Gentleman hands the smoking fag to the station master, and he hurries off with it. Pity, she'd die for one.
Thanks, Mary. Eimear, when Banshee saw this manuscript first, what were the first impressions and what drew you to the book, the story?
Oh, wow, yeah, we first received the manuscript, I think, about 2 years ago, in November 2021. We'd had an open call for book manuscripts into Banshee, and I think Mary's came in just before the deadline, and we were so thrilled to see her name in our inbox because we'd admired her work for so long. I suppose being a short story fan myself, I'd loved Prosperity Drive, but we were so intrigued to see that she'd sent us a novel, because up until then, we'd been a publisher of literary magazines, obviously, but also short story collections and poetry collections, and we hadn't yet published a novel, and it kind of represented, a really exciting opportunity for us as a publisher. And Mary had kind of previously in passing mentioned Penelope Unbound to me, when we both worked at UCC. And she kind of described to me this unforgettable image, which I think is beautifully depicted on the cover, actually, which is of this young woman, Nora Barnacle, Nora with a H, sitting on a suitcase in a city where she doesn't know anybody, she doesn't speak the language, she doesn't have any money, and she's just waiting for hours for her boyfriend Jim to come back. And Mary kind of explained to me, you know, in my version, she gets tired of waiting and she goes off and has her own adventure. And so I was incredibly intrigued by the idea of this character, and even the idea of writing a speculative history, which just seemed to me to be such an exciting space to be working in. And once I started reading the novel, then I was hooked. I just loved the voice. I loved how funny it was, how sex positive it was. I loved the kind of propulsive energy of it and the vibrancy of it. Also just really intrigued by its structure. It has this kind of Russian doll-like structure where Nora she's constantly remembering her previous lives, you know, whether it's her childhood in Galway or working in Dublin at the hotel or traveling Europe with Jim. And as a writer, it kind of blew my mind because I know how difficult it is to construct these narratives, but as a reader, it felt really organic, and you know, you always knew where you were, if you like. But I think this novel, like at its heart, it's just a story of a woman coming into her power, really. You know, Nora is like, she's so adaptable. She's a survivor. Like, she makes the best of any situation she finds herself in, and it's so easy to like root for her. But I suppose my one worry going in was that I don't know very much about Joyce, and I wondered, would that in any way impact my understanding of the novel or my appreciation of the novel. But in the end, I think my lack of Joyce knowledge kind of actually gave me great confidence in the book, because, you know, I'm just someone who loves reading novels, who loves a great rollicking story, who loves a spiky heroine, you know, and I still had a really rich experience, rich, enjoyable experience with this novel. But I think if you do love Joyce and if you are really knowledgeable in that area, there's loads of kind of fun references and Easter eggs and in-jokes to enjoy, but it's not a prerequisite, we'll say, for enjoying the novel. And I think like that's a line that Mary walks really well, that, you know, giving people who love Joyce like plenty to chew on, but also kind of making space for newcomers to just enjoy the novel on its own terms.
Mary, for you, the scene that you have read, and I read this in an interview as well, about that moment and kind of it being a turning point, and you obviously go somewhere with it in the book. For you, why Nora? Or, you know, had you always had an interest in Nora and kind of what her life, you know, might have been or was with Joyce? Or where did you come to before you began to write this piece? Was it that moment? Was it Nora Barnacle?
Well, I mean, I didn't have a particular interest in Nora Barnacle, and, you know, to me, it was about that moment of kind of decision in her life, that the two of them, who were very young lovers and abroad for the first time, I mean, they barely knew one another. And, you know, Jim goes off to hunt down a job and lodgings and leaves her on her own. And he had done this several times on their trips around Europe, you know, and she'd always waited. And I wondered, I was actually in Trieste. I was the writer in residence at the James Joyce Festival, the summer school there. And the director of the school took us on this fascinating tour of all the Joycean places. And one of the places he took us was the railway station. And he said, you know, this is where Nora waited all day for Jim to come back. And I don't know, that it's very hard to describe that moment where you think, this is my story, you know. I just thought, I want to write about this, you know. And I hadn't at that stage even thought about, you know, creating another history for her. I just thought, this would be an interesting, maybe short story, you know, what was it like sitting there all day, you know, and I hadn't thought about that. And once I started writing it, I thought, oh no, there's much more in this. And then the whole idea of actually creating a different history for her altogether came.
I suppose in rewriting history in a way, it's very interesting because, like you're saying there, Eimear, there are lots of Easter eggs and kind of moments in it that, you know, people may stumble across and find things that are referring to the real life events of Jim and Nora and how things panned out for them. But I suppose in the book, things become something other than they were. And I'm wondering, Mary, you've explained there about going to the train station and kind of thinking about that moment, but is there something intentional or unintentional in the political sense about writing about, I guess, a woman? You know, you said spiky heroine figures, you know, this idea of, well, who is she, without her reference to Joyce. You know, was that a conscious decision kind of early on or later, at a later point, about what that might mean to give her context that is not James Joyce?
Well, you know, some of the reviews have considered this, that, you know, that I didn't depart far enough from James Joyce, but in fact, you know, I think the presence of James Joyce in the book is like the presence of James Joyce in Irish literature. No writer, no Irish writer certainly can escape the influence of Joyce. He is always hanging around in the background, you know. But in terms of Nora, I felt, you know, most people think that Molly Bloom is Nora, that that's her. But, you know, that is not her. It's, you know, a version of her filtered through James Joyce's fantastic language and perceptions and little bits of her. This is what writers do. They're magpies. They take bits and pieces and make something else of them. And in fact, you know, I'm doing the same. You know, this is my version of Nora, but that's all it is. You know, in many ways, we can never know people from the past. But I was aware that, you know, that the only way to actually look at Nora and see her in the round was to split her up from Joyce, so that she's not the other half of Joyce or the muse of Joyce or, you know, the partner of Joyce or eventually the wife of Joyce, you know, that to see her, as I say, in the round, I felt I was going to have to split them up.
You mentioned, Eimear, about the humour in the book and the pace of the book and everything. I mean, I think it's a great read for so many people, like you say, whether they're familiar with Joyce, you know, in an intimate sense or not. And I think those moments of levity in it are brilliant for readers. It's a great book and very dynamic, I think. Where can people find it, Eimear, for their Christmas stockings and so on?
You can find it in all good bookshops and also on our website, bansheelit.com.
Great. Okay. Mary, thanks so much for taking time this morning. And Eimear, thank you so much. I'm a big fan of Banshee, and if you want to see other Banshee titles, you can go to their website and we'll link it in here as well. So thank you to Live Network and thank you to you both for this.